Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of the new trailer for Season 2 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And in my opinion, it looks kind of good. So I'll start with the things I like and then go to the things I'm worried about. So first of all, visually the show is great, and I don't just mean the special effects. I mean the overall style of it, the fact that everything is bright and beautiful and showing us places we want to be in, the fact that it all feels optimistic, there's a lot of humor in it, and so it feels like the older Star Trek shows, which were always good escapism because it shows you a place you dream about, the place you want to live in. So this is something this show is getting right finally, and also the fact that the show is episodic kind of ensures better pacing because they can no longer take just one story and drag it across 10 episodes, but the episodic formula will force more stories to be short and to the point, and so that is better in my opinion. So I think we're finally getting back to the correct formula of a Star Trek show. There are still a whole bunch of, continuity issues and just common sense issues sometimes inside of the stories, which I'm always complaining about, and I will keep complaining about, but those issues existed even in the older Star Trek shows. Even when I review an older episode of any older show, I will also be complaining about stuff like that. So that alone is not what made me dislike the new Trek shows. It was the other things were just the stories being depressing or just boring or stupid, or the internal inconsistencies, the lack of logic, the lack of morality. Those kinds of things are much more important compared to the minor details, even though I personally do appreciate the attention to detail as well, but that's not the main problem of the recent Star Trek productions. And so I am glad to see that this show is finally getting some of the stuff which is important. And at this point, all those issues, like the continuity mistakes, are kind of unfixable even if they try, because, this show came out of Discovery and it's continuity mess. So no matter what they do now, it will just raise more questions. Like suddenly they correct the Klingons who look like the TNG Klingons suddenly, but will they try to explain it somehow? Will they try to explain why the Discovery Klingons disappeared, or will they simply ignore it? And so it's kind of no matter what they do now, it will be a logical continuity problem. Maybe the best way will be to simply say that this whole show is in some alternate timeline, which is not the same universe as the other shows, something like that. With the cameo of the Lower Decks characters coming in, it's even more of a mess. So I'm kind of hoping they will simply say, when Boimler sees the past, and will say something like, oh, this isn't like what it looked like in the history books, and something like that, and maybe hint at the fact that it all might be some other timeline. Then that could be a good excuse for why things don't line up completely correctly. And Lower Decks were one of the few new Trek shows which actually was really careful with its continuity with the other Star Trek shows. That's one of the reasons I really like that show. And that's something I'm most curious to see in this new season, how they will tie the Lower Decks characters into this show. So I'm guessing they traveled back in time from the future, and so that opens up some neat possibilities to try to explain some of the continuity issues, like how come the Enterprise is constantly fighting the Gorn, and yet Kirk didn't know anything about the Gorn in TOS. And now they have Kirk in this season as well, so he's with them on the Enterprise and they'll be fighting Gorn. So we cannot say that Kirk simply never read up on the history of his own ship before he became the captain, and that's why he didn't know about the Gorn. That can no longer be the excuse, because he's literally interacting with them in the show while they're still fighting the Gorn. And also he now personally knows Noonien Singh's descendant, maybe even knows her biblically by the end of this season. And so can you imagine that when he meets Khan in the future, why doesn't he tell him, oh, by the way, I slept with your great 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 granddaughter a few short years ago, by the way. So you see how it doesn't make any kind of sense. Even if they try to come up with convoluted excuses, it will be even more ridiculous. Like if they say, oh, it's all classified now, I can never talk about my relationship with Khan's great 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 granddaughter because it got classified for some reason. So that will be stupid. So the only really clever way to solve all these issues is simply admit all of this is in a separate timeline. And so maybe when Boimler comes to the past and sees that things look completely different from what they should be, maybe he should mention it and theorize it might be an alternate timeline or something, and then it will be the perfect excuse. So that's the only way to fit everything together in a way that will not annoy my logic center in my brain. And so, according to the trailer, the show does look promising, everything looks beautiful, we have some nice shots of the Enterprise flying around beautiful locations. There's a shot of the Enterprise apparently flying away from some Klingon ships, and we see actual Klingons that look like Klingons. So I'm curious to see if they'll even acknowledge the Discovery Klingons, or if it's simply the way the Klingons now look, even though shouldn't they look human now at this point in time, and so it's still kind of a continuity mess. So maybe they will invent some convoluted way to explain everything, or they'll not say anything and just let us decide and let us guess. And I do kind of like the way that at least they do acknowledge what we the fans want. At least they realize the things that were annoying us and try to correct them. And so overall, I do think the shows are getting better. And the fact that they add some humor to it, and the fact that the characters are likable, and the ship is kind of a place you want to live in, and all those good things. And also we see a snippet of Spock apparently hooking up with Nurse Chapel, which is also kind of a continuity issue. Again, unless they explain it, maybe everyone's memories get erased in the head of the show, something like that. I kind of am hoping they will go with the alternate timeline excuse, because that way will also open up all the possibilities. If they do that, then they can say we can do whatever we want now. We are no longer tied up by the chains of the old continuities. So maybe it's better off for everyone. Simply say this is a different timeline, and that way they can do whatever they want. And the Gorn thing will still be kind of a continuity problem, because why did the entire species suddenly change into xenomorphs? So that's also one of the biggest issues. And we have a shot of Spock in a spacesuit kind of hearing something behind him even though he's in space, and we see what looks like a xenomorph behind him. They had a whole episode which was completely ripping off all the alien movies. The Gorn are like xenomorphs bursting out of people and running around the corridors eating everyone and all of that. And I'm not in favor of draconian copyright laws. I'm not in favor of never doing anything similar to what was done before. I'm the guy who used to make a lot of TNG edits, taking the old show and re-editing it into new stories and stuff like that. So obviously I would not be able to do it if copyright laws will be too draconian, and so I'm not in favor of those kinds of limitations either. But I am saying that a show will be more interesting if it's a little bit more imaginative and creative and does some new things and new ideas, and not just recycling old ideas all the time. If it's done once in a while as like a homage or a parody or a joke with some new spin on it, then it can be transformative, then it's still kind of creative in its own way, just like my PNG edits were kind of creative. And so I'm not against the occasional borrowing of ideas of other places to play with them. Odo was like a ripoff of the T-1000 from Terminator 2, obviously, and so we did have a lot of stuff like that in the old Trek shows, but they always added some new ideas on top. They always did something more, something extra, something new on top. And so when they had that episode with the xenomorphs running around for the entire episode, so it completely felt like a recycling of the alien movies with nothing really new added to it, and that's the problem. So I prefer the shows to be a little bit more creative and imaginative with some fresh new ideas, at least some of the time. So that's why I have such a big problem with it. It's not because I'm such a advocate of draconian copyright laws, because I'm not. The Orville wouldn't be able to exist if that was the case, and I am a big fan of the Orville. But one of the things I praise the Orville for is that they did add their own ideas as well. They did add some new things as well, and not just copying older stuff, even though they did that a lot as well, but they always added something fresh to it, and that's what made it okay. So I wish the show would do that. And so that shot of a xenomorph behind Spock is kind of ridiculous, but it all depends on how it will be in the final version. If it will be just a small homage, but the rest of the episode will have a bunch of new ideas, then I'll be totally okay with it. But if the entire episode will once again be just a remake of the Alien movies, then that will be ridiculous. And I think the most intriguing part of this whole trailer was the Lower Decks cameos, because first of all, I'm personally a big fan of Lower Decks. I think that was one of the better recent Star Trek shows. And also because it's just so interesting to take characters which we only ever saw in a cartoon form and turning them into live action, which is kind of the opposite of what they used to do. The original animated Star Trek show was taking characters that existed as live action and turning them into a cartoon, and here it's the reverse. So I think that's the episode I'm most excited for, because it just will be fun and will be interesting to see how they'll do it. So overall, I think the trailer is actually kind of good. We have a bunch of nice character moments, a lot of comedy, a lot of great visuals. The overall style of it, as I explained, is something that I always said Star Trek should be. And so I feel as if someone finally listened to my advice, to fix the Klingons, which we've been complaining about since Discovery. And so hopefully they will explain it all as well. It will not just be a silent admission of guilt, but they will actually try to explain it all. And Boimler would be the best character to try to explain it all because he is such a big history buff of the Star Trek universe. It will be ridiculous if he does not at least mention the fact that things do not look anything like what they're supposed to in this time period. So anyway, these are my 2 cents about this issue. I am looking forward to the new season. I will be reviewing every episode on this channel and will be making a lot of parody edits on my other channel. So check out all the links in the description and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.